Hello there everyone, welcome to the channel if you're new, welcome back if you are not. I am EDJ, and we are continuing with Kings and Generals Caesar series. So, yeah, last video we saw the final concluding battle between Pompey and Caesar, where Caesar defeated him, Pompey was killed, and by the Egyptians, in which Julius Caesar obviously was not chill with it, so he kind of intervenes into Egypt, politics, and, essentially, basically, I believe at this time the Ptolemaic kingdom was kind of split, because I know there was a civil war between Ptolemy and Cleopatra, and, Cleopatra was exiled, I believe, or in exile. Caesar obviously wasn't happy that, Pompey was dead, so he kind of settles there. He kind of basically takes it. I mean, it's not officially taken until, like, the death of Antony and Cleopatra, but he kind of just settles there for a bit, and he's responsible for being the one putting Cleopatra on the throne, so, and, having a romance, fathering a son with her, Caesarion. So overall, there's a lot of interesting things that happen in Egypt with Caesar, so we'll just be getting right into it. So yeah, if you want to watch the original video without me talking or pausing the talk, the link's always down in the description down below. And without any further ado, let's just get right into it. Let's watch the Siege of Alexandria from Kings and Generals.
It had now been approximately a year and a half since Caesar made the fateful decision to cross the Rubicon. In that time, he had forced the Optimate faction out of Italy and conquered the peninsula, defeated the Republic's best army in Spain, and had now defeated the Republic's greatest general, Pompey, at Pharsalus. But civil wars, by their nature, demand a total victory, and Caesar still had a way to go to accomplish this goal. And unfortunately for him, in this episode he will not take steps to finish the war, but will be dragged into a civil war of another state.
Egypt.
Badass champions, tough bosses, million. Throughout Caesar's campaigns in Greece, he had continued to levy legions elsewhere, adding the 31st, 32nd and 33rd to his ranks. Following the Battle of Pharsalus, he also inducted some of Pompey's surrendered men into his army, making the 34th, 35th, 36th and 37th legions. Caesar, by this stage of the war, now had the numerical advantage, but the Optimate faction still harbored some of the most influential politicians of the day. The war was far from over. Caesar's first priority after the Battle of Pharsalus was Pompey himself. He immediately left in pursuit, leaving Antony to oversee the political situation in Rome. It was the time of year where the elections for next year's consul would usually be decided, and Caesar's term as consul of the year 48 BC would be coming to an end. Caesar would entrust Antony with ensuring that his political power continued. Having picked up on Pompey's trail through informants in Asia Minor, Caesar pursued Pompey to Egypt with a fleet of 10 Rhodian ships, as well as a few more from Asia Minor. On board were 2 legions, the 6th and 27th, totaling just around 3,200 infantry, as many soldiers as had been lost to war and illness over the years, and 800 cavalry. Caesar only learned of his ex-triumvir's death upon his arrival in Alexandria at the start of October 48 BC, just a few days after Pompey's death. According to Plutarch and Cassius Dio, when Caesar was first presented with Pompey's head, he turned away disgusted. He was next presented the seal ring of Pompey, at which point Caesar broke down in tears. Both historians interpret this grief differently. Plutarch claims that it was genuine. After all, though enemies in later life, Caesar and Pompey had been political allies for around 8 years, had effectively ruled Rome together and had even been related by marriage. Dio, on the other hand, claims that this grief was only for show and that Caesar had always hated Pompey from the start. It is impossible to say which is true. However, it is like...
You know, I don't know, like, I think Caesar did care, you know, and I do think he wanted to pardon Pompey, whether maybe out of love or maybe just out of political clout, but then again, I don't know, that depends on Pompey, right? Like, would he just go with everyone else and keep fighting? Like, you know, man, I don't know. I don't think Caesar's a sociopath or, like, a psychopath. Like, he doesn't care about anyone or anything. I don't know, I think there's a good chance he would have tried to pardon Pompey, or at least look gracious, right? I do believe there is some history, even if there are enemies, like, I don't know, I do think Caesar... I think there's a strong chance he actually did care, you know?
Likely that Caesar was incredibly frustrated at Pompey's death. Caesar had a genius for public relations, capturing Pompey, forcing him to renounce the Senate, and then pardoning him, as was Caesar's habit, would have been the ultimate coup de grace. Instead, Pompey's assassination made him a martyr for the ultimate cause, something Caesar would have surely wished to avoid.
Yeah, there's also that, you know, if Caesar, I don't doubt Caesar also, was, you know, driven to pardon, like I said, I have no doubt he would have pardoned Pompey. Then again, how much of it out of love or out of political gain, who knows, but yeah, either way, that does put a hamper on his plans.
In Rome, however, Antony was able to capitalize on news of Pompey's death. Many in Rome had refused to believe that Pompey had been defeated, but upon being presented with Pompey's ring, which Caesar had sent to Rome, they finally accepted that the old general was lost and was dead. Rome now acclaimed Caesar as the victor, bestowing countless honors on him. Seizing upon the situation, Antony labeled the Pompeians in Africa as conspirators, declared a national emergency, and that a dictator was needed. The man chosen to be dictator was, of course, Caesar.
Who else?
Rather than the regular 6 months, his term as dictator was also set at 1 year, running through October 47 BC. In return for his continued loyalty and effectiveness, Antony was named by Caesar as Master of Horse, effectively his second in command, and was entrusted with the governance of Italy and Rome in Caesar's absence.
Yeah, this is where Mark Antony really starts coming into his own, huh? Yeah, this is where he starts coming into his own, and where the famous notion of him being Caesar's right-hand man really comes into play. Because before it was like Labienus, Labienus, you know. So yeah, it took a while for Antony to rise. I just assumed he was always kind of there, but in a way he was, but you know, this was really his rise, so yeah.
Many Optimate politicians, such as Gaius Cassius, now returned to Rome and appealed for forgiveness from Caesar. All were spared and welcomed into the new regime. Cicero also returned to Rome and was forgiven. He returned to the Senate, where he hoped to use his influence to do what he could to preserve the Republic. With Caesar in Egypt now being a dictator, he decided to turn his attention to Roman interests in the area, namely the rulership of the kingdom and its debt to Rome. As we have seen, Egypt was ruled by the boy pharaoh Ptolemy XIII. The pharaoh's father, Ptolemy XII, had made an alliance with Rome during Caesar's tenure as consul in 60 BC. Before his death, Ptolemy XII named his eldest son, Ptolemy XIII, and his eldest daughter, Cleopatra VII, as co-rulers, with Rome as the guarantor of the will. Tensions between the...
Yo, can I just say that Ptolemy's family line is so weird to follow? Like, I was researching, you know, Ptolemy and Ptolemaic Egypt, because I think Ptolemy is probably my favorite of Alexander's successors, and just But man, is his family line whack. Doesn't help that like all the males are basically named Ptolemy and all the women after a while Cleopatra. That is already hard to follow with all the incest and everything wild that was happening, and it is a disaster, that family. But hey, it lasted long, so something had to be right. But man, it is wild.
The two sibling rulers quickly escalated, however, both raising armies against each other. Furthermore, both had inherited the debts of their father. Ptolemy XII had borrowed huge sums of money from Rome throughout his life, and by his death, there was still an unpaid debt of 17.5 million drachmae to the Republic, which constituted approximately half of Egypt's yearly revenue. Caesar was badly in need of money to pay his growing armies, and also saw an opportunity to solidify Roman influence in the area. As consul when the alliance with Egypt was first made, and the current dictator, Caesar thought it his obligation to see that pro-Roman rule in Egypt was maintained and that the debt was paid. Caesar first attempted to take a diplomatic approach, suggesting that Ptolemy and Cleopatra both disband their armies and that he act as an arbitrator to see their father's will fulfilled. He also requested the debt be paid, but was willing to reduce it to 10 million drachmae. Ptolemy, though pharaoh by title, was still young, and as such, was being advised by a council who effectively ruled Egypt through their regency. Pothinus, a eunuch, was one of the most influential of these advisors. It had been on his advice that Pompey had been assassinated as a ploy to curry favor with Caesar. Now he opposed Caesar's suggestions. He saw Caesar's arrival as a threat to royal authority, and initially refused to pay the debt. He even went so far as to bring Ptolemy's royal army into Alexandria under the command of Achilles, one of Pompey's killers. This was clear defiance of Caesar's demands that Ptolemy's armies be disbanded, and in response, Caesar sent messengers to Cleopatra, perhaps thinking she would be able to better fulfill his demands without requiring a regent.
Yeah, the famous story that Cleopatra was brought like what in a rug or something, and then like dropped before Caesar, winning, which started their, their very long relationship.
Cleopatra decided to meet Caesar in secret within Alexandria. Plutarch gives an extraordinary account of this meeting, in which Cleopatra, with the help of her right-hand man Apollodorus, smuggles herself into the city in a bed sack, laundry bag, or carpet. Cassius Dio gives the much more reasonable account that the two simply met in secret with no reference to her being smuggled in. Both sources, however, agree that Cleopatra was quickly able to seduce Caesar. Cleopatra is described as being beautiful, charming, and above all, clever. She was a brilliant orator and could speak as many as 8 languages, and was the first Ptolemaic ruler to learn Egyptian.
Which is insane, because they're in Egypt, but yeah, some people are quick to jump, like, oh, Cleopatra actually wasn't really, like, physically attractive, or, like, some people will say that, and other people will be like, no, she was, like, basically. And then there's other people who would be like, well, she was attractive, just not supermodel attractive, like the movies. You know what I mean, right? The whole, how did Cleopatra look like? I think what really was, I guess you could say, attractive or like hot about her, was her just outstanding intelligence. Because obviously, the ability to speak that many languages, her natural charm, I think from the overly sarcastic productions video on her, basically a great conversationalist with her great intelligence, she could just talk about anything. So I think, it's kind of like, I don't know about her physical looks, but obviously when you have that much going for you, like, you can make yourself very attractive, right? Just saying the right words, personality and intelligence go a long way in making someone attractive and, I guess hot, so, yeah, Cleopatra just had that in spades, and won over Caesar, and then Mark Antony thereafter. Just, yeah, you could see it, right?
Caesar immediately tried to reconcile the two monarchs, proclaiming them co-monarchs, and offering the island of Cyprus, recently annexed from the Egyptians by Rome, to the other two siblings, Arsinoe and Ptolemy XIV, thus removing other potential claimants to the Egyptian throne. Pothinus, however, was not happy with this agreement. He was worried that, due to Cleopatra's now very close relationship with Caesar, she would be the more powerful of the two siblings, and that Pothinus would, as a result, lose his influence. He began stirring up unrest in the city, even having gold from the temples and royal treasury melted down in a deliberate attempt to show Caesar as being extortionate. With the situation worsening, Caesar sent emissaries to Achilles and the Egyptian army, attempting to explain that he only wanted to be an arbitrator of the will, as was his legal right. These emissaries were killed on Achilles' orders. The message was clear: a fight was imminent. Caesar was aware that he did not have enough men to fight in the open, only having the 4,000 he had brought from Greece. Instead, he ordered his men to seize the royal quarters where he had been housed. Within these quarters were Cleopatra, Pothinus, Arsinoe, and the boy pharaoh Ptolemy himself. Having taken control of the pharaoh, Caesar awaited Achilles' next move. Achilles' army numbered around 20,000, plus a further 2,000 cavalry, all experienced veterans. Their numbers were swelled still further by the rioting Alexandrian citizens and even slaves, who aligned with the army and took up arms, making a kind of militia. Things were descending into chaos, and Caesar was forced to begin further fortifying his position and to send messengers to allies and his forces in Asia Minor requesting reinforcements. What had started as a simple political mission had now devolved into a siege.
Unlock supercharged health with these 7 fermented foods.
Fermented foods! Really good for your heart.
Achilles' army occupied the majority of the city to the west, including the Euanstos harbour, while Caesar only held the royal quarters and the royal harbour. Achilles regularly attacked Caesar's position, probing for weaknesses, but the narrow streets helped mitigate the difference in numbers, Caesar's men consistently repulsing these attacks. Achilles next turned his attention to the great harbour where both the Egyptian fleet and Caesar's fleet lay at anchor. If Achilles could seize this harbour and the ships, he would be able to cut off any chance of Caesar being resupplied or receiving reinforcements. Sending a diversionary force to attack Caesar's defences, Achilles simultaneously sent a larger force to seize the harbour. Caesar was well aware of the strategic value of the harbour, and so, leaving as small a force as was necessary to hold the defences, he led his men to the harbour. The fighting around the harbour was particularly brutal, and Caesar quickly realised he did not have enough men to win this fight and defend the harbour. Instead, Caesar effectively fought a delaying action, holding off the Egyptian force long enough for his men to set fire to the Egyptian fleet and pull their own fleet back to the royal harbour. The fire was ferocious and spread quickly, partially burning the great library of Alexandria. The damage was relatively minor, fortunately, and the library would continue for a number of centuries afterwards. Seizing the opportunity of having naval supremacy, Caesar sailed a portion of his men to the island of Pharos, which controlled access to all Alexandria's harbours, establishing a small garrison there, likely around the promenade on which the lighthouse itself was situated. Caesar and the rest of his forces then retreated back to the royal quarters. While Caesar persisted in improving his defences, Pothinus continued his resistance from the inside. Secretly, he sent messages to Achilles encouraging him to continue his attacks, and plotted to assassinate Caesar. Caesar's men, however, were able to catch some of Pothinus's messengers, who were forced to reveal the plot. Caesar immediately had Pothinus killed. Arsinoe, Ptolemy's sister, had greater success, escaping Caesar's defences and joining Achilles. Following this, an uneasy status quo developed. Caesar continued to fortify his position against any assaults, even making makeshift battering rams to break down the walls of houses to keep a continuous line of defense. The Alexandrians also constructed their own barricades to keep Caesar penned in, some as high as 12 meters. Achilles frequently sent some of his militia forces to assault various points of Caesar's defenses to look for weakness, keeping his veterans in reserve, but with little success. Perhaps frustrated by this lack of success, a rift began to form between Arsinoe and Achilles, and eventually Arsinoe had Achilles killed and replaced by her own man, Ganymedes. Ganymedes was a cunning general and immediately took steps to try and break the stalemate. Alexandria was supplied by subterranean watercourses that ran throughout the city. Ganymedes, therefore, ordered that those sections that flowed into the parts of the city controlled by Caesar be blocked, and then had these sections polluted with seawater, rendering them undrinkable. Such a tactic would have been difficult to pull off, but the Alexandrians were renowned engineers and were quickly able to complete the project, thus making Caesar's position even more precarious.
Dang, man. They're having an engineer off with Caesar. But this is insane. Caesar had what, 4,000 men, he said? But yeah, again, the tightly compact space obviously works to his advantage, and obviously they're Caesar's men. Their discipline is second to none. So yeah, essentially he can hold his own in enemy territory, outnumbered, and he also has the king, so yeah. lots going for him, even though the situation does look bad.
Yes. Some of Caesar's men started to panic, some saying that they should have retreated much earlier. Fortunately for them, Caesar took control of the situation. He made it clear that if they were to attempt to retreat, the Alexandrians would catch them before they could successfully evacuate everyone. He instead ordered wells to be dug day and night, and fresh water was soon found, avoiding disaster. Though the situation had been quickly rectified, it was clear that Ganymedes was a dangerous enemy, not to be taken lightly. In the next episode of our series, Caesar will continue trying to survive in Alexandria and turn the situation once again, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be
And so yes, now Caesar will have to basically wait for reinforcements and continue holding his own. So I just want to get right into it, guys. I love this. I'm loving this series. I've watched like a bunch of episodes so far in one sitting. I'm going to continue right now. So goodbye everyone. I'll see you in the next one.